Welcome to Inside the Channel, a podcast where we discuss trends in the channel today. From insight to action, leveraging Sophos' 2024 Threat Report to enhance MSP security strategies, brought to you by Sophos. I'm your host, Kenna Johnson from the Channel Company. Today we're tackling SMB cybersecurity challenges from the latest Sophos Threat Report and exploring how Sophos products empower MSPs against ransomware and cyber threats. Joining me are Scott Barlow and John Shearer from Sophos. Glad to have you both here with me again. Segment 1, Sophos Threat Report. Let's start by discussing the key findings. Ransomware seems to be the biggest concern for SMBs. Why does it still remain such a significant threat?
Ransomware is a concern for every sized organization, but the impact on SMBs is much bigger. And that's why I think it's more concerning. It's because of that impact. And the fact is, ransomware is so predominant and prevalent today at all levels of business, and especially at the SMB level, because it works. The payment rate is going up, the ransom demands are going up, as are, the median payment itself. It's experienced a 5 times year-on-year increase, as are the costs of recovery. So you can see that it's a lucrative business for the adversaries. And specifically on the SMB side of things, with some of the cheaper ransomware that's available today, where there's no profit sharing needed, they can operate at scale. Unlike enterprise ransomware, where there's more of a sort of organized crime kind of mentality to it with these affiliate programs, the folks that are going after some of the smaller businesses, which are some of the bigger gangs, but also some of the lower level criminals as well. So on the whole, we have a lot of businesses out there that are potential targets. Greater than 90% of the world's businesses are small and medium businesses. In the US alone, 40% of all economic activity is due to SMBs. And if we look at the incident response cases from last year, 75% of them, the data that's included in this report, came from SMBs. So you've got a lot of organizations, and then we also have a quality of protection and detection, as well as a reduced capacity across the board for a lot of these SMBs. They lack resources, whether those are financial or technical. So for example, the lack of expertise in, let's say, threat hunting, the analysts that are required to spot suspicious signals, investigate them, and then mount a response. And then finally, there's a lack of awareness. We hear a lot about ransomware, and we hear a lot about big organizations getting targeted and breached by ransomware, but we seldom hear about the smaller organizations out there. So this sort of Wall Street versus Main Street effect with respect to awareness is why we wrote this report specifically, and specifically focused on the small and medium-sized businesses.
Small businesses are prime targets due to their limited resources. How are they holding up against other cyber threats like data theft and web-based malware distribution?
In terms of outcomes, obviously ransomware is probably as bad as it gets. When you are faced with the potential of closing down your business versus paying a ransom, sometimes in quite exorbitant ransoms, it can have a massive impact. But when we look at all the other threats, so 90% of the detections that we were seeing last year, and that's the beginning of the attack, right? The preventive side of things, involve data or credential theft in some form. Credential theft is quite a big industry on its own. We're talking about underground firms that are dedicated to buying and selling access to cloud services, buying and selling usernames and passwords and authentication tokens. And if you look at the breakdown of these detections, nearly half were some form of stealer. There are some that are very generic, where they're looking at hoovering up basically anything they can, password stores, cookies, anything else that might be useful for some sort of fraud or scam. But then there's some very specific ones as well, where we can see, there's some stealers out there that are looking at for Discord tokens specifically and trying to get access to those accounts so they can either perpetrate fraud or sell them on to others. There's also the case of remote ransomware, which we saw was quite a bit on the rise in the last year. Remote ransomware is where an unmanaged device on an organization's network attempts to encrypt files on other systems through network file access. The way that this typically happens is the adversaries gain some foothold by exploiting some unprotected assets. These could be servers, these could be personal devices, or even network appliances. And then from there, they target the Windows-based networks. And like remote ransomware, we've seen cyber criminals who've been using web-based delivery for malware for a little while, but they've really stepped it up in the past year in order to evade detection. Malvertising, malicious online advertising, is something that has been around for a little while now. I spoke about this back in 2015 at RSA, but it's on the rise again. And a lot of this is using techniques like SEO, search engine optimization, poisoning, to trick users into clicking on malicious links. And this is really to get around the default blocks of Visual Basic for applications macros that Microsoft put in place last year. And so in order to get around some of these things, they're starting to use or reuse more web-based delivery for their malware.
How has the sophistication of business email compromise attacks evolved, and what new tactics are cyber criminals employing?
There's still some of the old school run-of-the-mill spamming and scamming going on, but we're seeing fewer links and attachments in emails these days. And it seems that the cyber criminals last year decided to prefer to engage with their targets in a conversation rather than just sending things into the organization and hoping that somebody opens or clicks on the link. And what they're doing is by engaging in this conversation, they're trying to lure them in and lower their sense of security, if you will, by making them feel comfortable in a conversation. We're seeing, obviously thread jacking is something where you jump into the middle of the thread, but now we're also seeing the cyber criminals proactively reach out to people and engage them in that conversation. We've even seen one specific case where the threat actor called the victim and had them action on an email that was actually in their quarantine, so they had to pull it out first and then action on the email. But they're also looking to evade content scammers. So content scanners, as the name would imply, they look at the content of the email and then make decisions, and the detections are based off of that content. So in order to subvert those content scanners, they're using things like images or QR codes. Very frequently, we're seeing, again, the use of phone numbers, but in this case, it's you get an invoice that says, you've just subscribed to this software package at $99 or $299 or whatever the price may be. But if this is an error, please call this phone number, and that's how they get you on the hook. There's still some links and some attachments being used. But what we've seen is they're starting to abuse different document formats. So PDF is very much on the rise. We also saw in early 2023 a Quackbot campaign, which used OneNote documents. And we have also observed these archive formats being used. So specifically the MSIX archive format. And this is all in a way, in service of bypassing these detections. And then finally, we've even seen the cyber criminals abusing the Microsoft's own services as well. So 15% of all spam that was blocked came from Microsoft's own business-oriented on Microsoft.com infrastructure.
What is the term malware as a service, and what factors have contributed to its impact?
Malware as a service, much like other as a service things out there, is really just a way of offloading some of the activity to essentially an expert or somebody who's focused on just doing that specific thing. The cybercrime as a service writ large, and then you've got the people that are focused on deploying malware. You've got phishing as a service, people that are focused on giving you the infrastructure and the ability to do phishing at scale. And what this does is it provides the people doing the attacks with some readily available services and infrastructure where they may not be specifically experts in that realm of the attack, that particular phase of the attack. So it gives them that ability to still participate in that phase of the attack, but without having to set up their own infrastructure. And we're seeing this specialization and professionalization of cybercrime in a bunch of different areas, from the front end of actually getting victims in the first place to initial access brokers, which focus on breaching the network of a corporation and then selling that access on to somebody who might be focusing on implants or droppers in order to maintain persistence. And very often these droppers are these info stealers that I was talking about previously that are gathering credentials and other associated pieces of data from the business, which again can be further sold on to the maybe the ransomware actors down at the end of the line, which are going to deploy ransomware, encrypt the files, steal the files in many cases as well. And then finally, there's cash out experts, right? That to me, that's part of the malware as a service as well, because once you collect the Bitcoins or all the other types of cryptocurrency, internet funny money, you actually have to turn that into real dollars and cents in order to be able to spend it in the real world. So you have these cash out experts out there as well that are participating in this particular market.
Can you shed some light on the evolving tactics employed by attackers, such as abusing drivers and targeting mobile device users?
Abuse of drivers is something that has been around for a little bit, but it's starting to see a lot more prevalence in the threat landscape these days. And there are two types of driver abuse. There's, broadly speaking, there's the malware that's been signed with stolen or leaked certificates. And then there's the vulnerable drivers that have valid signatures. Now, The latter is much easier to use because there's already vulnerability in the driver. It's already being trusted by the operating system. It's a little bit less risky than trying to go and break into a corporation, steal their signing certificates, and then use that to sign your own malware. And this is often kernel drivers, right? So these kernel drivers load very early at operating system startup and often before the security solutions can get their hooks into the operating system itself. And so they can preload before the security software loads, and then they then get used to disable antivirus or security software. But the drivers themselves don't be malicious either. We've seen legitimate drivers being used to sideload malware into memory. Specifically on the turning off your EDR or your security solution, this is a signal that needs to be observed. So if you do have complete telemetry in your organization and you notice something like this, it should be a signal that this needs to be investigated. Now, on the mobile device side, we're seeing many more small businesses rely on mobile devices to do their daily work, whether it's specific apps that are connecting to the cloud or, let's say distributed point of sale systems that you need to manage. And these smaller businesses can be distributed as well, and they're relying on these services. And so the mobile threats that we're seeing are focused mainly on financial gain. There's a lot of spyware out there that harvests data that is resold for fraud or for scams or for blackmail even. And we're still seeing some SMS premium rate subscription action going on here. So the bad guys will subscribe your number to an SMS premium rate number, and then they'll be able to just make money off the back end that way. And they're increasingly targeting cryptocurrency wallets, which are often stored on the phone. There was a specific pig butchering scam. Pig butchering is a scam that we started noticing around 2021 that we were calling CryptoROM. But these scams often involve luring people in dating sites or other social media sites and moving them off to different platforms like WhatsApp or Telegram, and then introducing some sort of scam that revolves around cryptocurrency. You have some sort of inside knowledge and you want to share that with your target. And so through those scams, we've seen a particular bank in Kansas actually fail and get seized by the FDIC because the CEO, in an attempt to recover his losses, over $12 million in this case, from this kind of scam, was taking those from the bank deposits. So now we're starting to see this crossing over from these social scams that typically target personal accounts to now impacting small businesses as well.
John, taking all of that in, what are some proactive measures MSPs can take to better defend their customers against evolving cyber threats?
MSPs really need to stay current with the popular attack trends. And this is a reason why we publish things like the Sophos threat report as well as active adversary reports. And what that does is when we stay current with these attack trends, when we stay current with the techniques and the tactics that criminals are using, it helps us with detection engineering, but it also helps us deploy the protective technologies where they need to be. You need to get ahead of the cyber criminals. When we're talking cybersecurity, we're talking about managing risk. And part of managing risk is not only reducing the attack surface area, but it's also applying the technologies where they're needed within the network. And you have to have visibility into everything. If you're hoping to detect and to evict a criminal from your network, you need to know that they're there. And the nice thing about the ability of MSPs to have this visibility into all their customers is that an event at one customer can actually be used to protect all the other customers as well. So if you're noticing, let's say you have a bunch of customers that are in a particular industry and you notice one of them gets attacked, it's not a far stretch to think that other companies in that particular sector might get attacked as well. And so it kind of gives you a bit of a heads up, and you can certainly use that information to your benefit to protect the rest of your customers as well. And as far as protecting your customers, you need to protect them like they were your own business, because they are the lifeblood of your business. And so the same protections that you would apply for your own systems, for your own networks and your employees, you need to be able to apply those protections to your customers as well. This, example of that is having multi-factor authentication deployed everywhere it can be, especially on the remote access solutions that you're probably using to administer your customers. And so the best way to protect your customers is to not become a target yourself by applying the right amount of protection and prevention to your own systems as well as to theirs.
That brings us to segment 2, Sophos' profile and products for MSPs. Scott, can you provide a high-level overview of the categories of solutions Sophos offers?
We actually separate the different products and services that we have into 5 different categories. SecOps, and then we have endpoint, network, cloud, and email security as the other four. And in SecOps, it's super important. As John mentioned, 75% of the IR cases were from SMBs, but also having the MSP protect themselves as well. So in SecOps, we have managed detection and response. We also have XDR, IR, we do threat intelligence, and then some orchestration. On the endpoint side, we have a few different flavors of endpoint, both for the endpoint as well as the server. Traditional endpoint protection, but it's next generation endpoint protection. That includes protection against ransomware and a variety of other attacks that John was just mentioning. We have XDR, and then workload protection for servers, and then mobile. And then we can also manage device encryption. I think a lot of partners out there and a lot of customers don't understand that we can actually manage BitLocker and File Vault as well. And it actually makes it a much better experience overall, both for the MSP as well as the customer. On the network side, we have a next generation firewall. We call it XGS. We also have NDR, network detection and response. And then we get into zero trust networking, ZTNA, SD-WAN switches, and wireless access points. And then on the cloud, we can actually do cloud security posture management through a product that we call Cloud Optics. And then through Cloud Optics, we can provide cloud detection and response. And then our endpoint for the server, as well as the firewall, are both in AWS and Azure, as well as GCP. And then on the email side, we actually do email security and email encryption. And then on top of that, user awareness training. So one of the most important things that an MSP could do is actually ensure that the end user is aware that they shouldn't be clicking on links, or how to identify what a phishing attack is, because the end user is really the last defense. But all of those products and services are wrapped into a centralized management system that we actually call Sophos Central.
How do your products work together to provide comprehensive cybersecurity?
All of Sophos' products and services are actually developed in concert with one another, and the engineering teams are very close and engaged so that each of the different products can actually communicate with one another through what we call an adaptive cybersecurity ecosystem. And it's designed as a broad system built to optimize the prevention, the detection, and the response of the threats that John was just referencing. We combine a lot of the automation with live human threat hunting to enable MSPs to have more protection and, more importantly, to sleep at night, because somebody is always watching their customer's environment, but more importantly, their own environment on a 24/7 basis. And so if you're using, different products and services from each of those categories, for instance, the endpoint as well as the firewall, the endpoint and the firewall talk to each other. And so if the endpoint ever becomes compromised, the firewall can detect that and isolate that endpoint to prevent any lateral propagation. Another great example is what we call synchronized application control. And so the majority of the traffic that actually flows through the firewall is encrypted. So now the firewall can say, hey, endpoint, why are you requesting this information? The endpoint can say, hey, it's for this specific application. And now the MSP or the customer can make a decision. Do we allow that application, or do we block that application because it's not listed in the approved applications within that customer's environment? You could look at this adaptive cybersecurity ecosystem more as a security platform rather than a set of point products, but it's all managed together, like I said before, in that centralized dashboard, so that an MSP and even a customer, but an MSP can log into the partner dashboard, see what's happening across their entire customer base. They can add different products and services to each of those customers. And the best part about it is it all synchronizes either their PSA application or their billing system or their RMM tool. So it provides this level of automation, not just on the security product side, but for the MSP to help them grow their revenue, lower their costs, and improve their operational efficiency overall.
For MSPs looking to choose the right MDR solution, what are some key factors they should consider, especially in light of the threats highlighted in the report?
I think there's really three questions that they should ask themselves, and it all centers around compatibility. Does the MDR tool, is it compatible with their environment? Does the MDR tool ingest all of these third-party applications, that an MSP uses across their customer base? So for instance, you might use a different product for email. does that MDR tool ingest that email telemetry to prevent, open relays or give you really better or a bigger picture of exactly what's happening within your customer's environment? Is it compatible with your needs, right? I think what's really important, there's a lot of vendors out there that will let you know that there's a problem at your customer, but that MDR vendor is not going to go and do that incident response. So as an MSP, you need to make the decision, do you want a tool, an MDR product that will also do incident response, that will have partnerships with insurance vendors, they'll put their money where their mouths are under a Sophos breach warranty protection. So you want to make sure that it is compatible with your needs. And then lastly, you want to make sure it's compatible with your business. Do you have, as an MSP or as an MSSP, the capability to have a security technician go out and do those active threat hunts yourself? Or do you want the vendor, the MDR vendor that you're working with, to go out there and do it on your behalf or collaborate with you to go do that threat hunting together? I think that's the biggest difference, where you have eyes on glass versus hands on keyboard. Eyes on glass is nice if you can actually go and do the threat hunting, the remediation, the incident response. You need hands on keyboard if you don't have those capabilities built into your organization today.
Finally, how can we learn more?
So the best way to learn more is to go to our website, sophos.com. If you're an MSP and interested in checking out more, sophos.com/MSP. I am always happy to get emails from anybody with questions or, comments. So my email address is scott.barlow@sophos.com. And I would highly recommend everybody that listens to this to go check out that threat report, because it will provide you a variety of important data that you can actually use when communicating with your customers. And it's fantastic because I haven't really seen a lot that's out there when you talk about cyber threats on Main Street.
John and Scott, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you, Kenna.
I'm your host, Kenna Johnson. See you next time.